welcome back to the Villa Times. This is actually a bonus episode that we're recording this evening with myself, Phil, and Ivan. Reason why we're doing this one tonight, obviously we have the sad news over the weekend of the death of Villa legend Peter McParland. As you know, if you've watched any of these, or watched or listened to any of our episodes so far, we like to talk about a bit of Villa history, a bit of Villa nostalgia, and I mean, there isn't a player who is more synonymous with that subject than a player who has scored in an FA Cup final for Aston Villa and won us the FA Cup for the last time that we won it 68 years ago. So that's why we're here, Ivan, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And it's, I suppose, particularly sad to hear of Peter's death, given that FA Cup context and what we've experienced this season, isn't it? But yeah, such an iconic Villa figure. And I think that, you know, even not great scholars of Villa history will often have heard Peter McParland's name because of those FA Cup goals. And I think that he genuinely is one of those true icons of Aston Villa's, you know, very, very storied history. Not sure he'd have probably realised that when he scored those two goals in the 1957 FA Cup final, that we would... you know, upon his death, we never would have won it again, which is pretty mad, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And, you know, he was a really great man as well. I mean, I don't know if, you know, anyone who's not aware of him, but he did lots of interviews over the years as an ex-Villa player, and he always came across as a like softly spoken gentleman, really. So, you know, a real kind of statesman of Aston Villa history, a great player, and we should never forget that.
And recently was at the 150th anniversary celebrations as well, wasn't he? So, you know, as like you say, has been relatively active in the club, you know, right up until his untimely passing. But yeah, I mean, you know, played for Villa for over 10 years. Made his debut as early as 1952. And I think, you know, when you look back at McParland's history with Villa, it's obviously the headline, if you like, is that FA Cup final because of the two goals, you know, the iconic images of him amongst the team lifting Johnny Dixon up on their shoulders, holding the cup. And I think it was obviously such a, you know, one of the first kind of really sort of televised games. People saw this, people knew about this Villa team, and a team that had been really underdogs, you know, against a really sort of very strong Manchester United side. Perhaps the final is as much remembered for McParland's two goals as his challenge on Ray Wood in the Manchester United goal, which fractured Wood's cheekbone. And in the days before substitutes, Ray Wood then spent the rest of the game kind of out on the left wing with one of the Blanchflower brothers in goal instead. So I think there was a kind of a bit of perceived animosity then at that point, you know, between McParland and Manchester United, because there was, you know, nowadays obviously you wouldn't be able to get away with that kind of idea of charging the goalkeeper, but you know, all that time ago it seemed to be fair game. And I think it's interesting, as I said, there was probably some thought of some animosity really, but you know, McParland shared quite a lot of links with Manchester United players. You know, I mentioned the Blanchflower brothers who he played international football with, and also Harry Gregg, who would survive the Munich air crash for Manchester United and would go on to play in goal for Northern Ireland in the same side as McParland. And I was interested to see, actually, you know, as a kind of a fairly unknown fact to me, is that Peter McParland actually was one of the pallbearers at Duncan Edwards' funeral as well. Which is interesting.
I have to say, I mean, we've got to just say, most of us have animosity towards Man United. So I think, you know, he speaks for many football fans, not just Aston Villa fans, with maybe the bit of antagonism that came from that incident. I actually watched that game back today. If anyone hasn't seen it, you can find on YouTube the history of Aston Villa up to 1989, which was my education when I first became a Villa fan. But it's got some great archive footage from that FA Cup run. And the game itself, he was involved in that incident with the keeper, and the footage is good enough for you to be able to watch back and see whether you think it was a foul or not. I mean, obviously, I'm completely biased, so it wasn't a foul. And then McParland's 2 goals. I mean, he really was instrumental in that game, wasn't he? He was the main man throughout the match.
Yeah, and indeed had been over the campaign. I mean, he scored 7 goals including the 2 in the final, across the campaign, ready to kind of drive Villa towards Wembley. So I think that, yeah, incredibly influential in that season. But of course, I think because of the importance of that, often, we kind of hang. Well, Peter McParland was the striker that, or the winger that scored the 2 goals that won us the FA Cup in 1957. But actually, his impact on Villa is probably much wider. Because he made over 340 appearances. Scored 121 goals. We're talking about someone who, as I say, was at Villa for a decade, which is, kind of mindful of that, because the FA Cup was important, but there were equally lots of other important contributions he made. As we know that, winning the FA Cup, actually what followed that was not some dynasty building, was relegation. And actually he, again, really kind of drove Villa 20 odd goals in the old second division to get Villa straight back up. And then in the inaugural League Cup campaign, scored in the final against Rotherham as well, so to win Villa the 1961 League Cup. So, this is someone whose legacy, obviously the FA Cup is incredibly important, but goes beyond that. And I think, I guess he was probably the first player ever to score in an FA Cup final and a League Cup final, given that he scored in the first ever League Cup.
Yeah, well, he would have been, wouldn't he? Yeah. In fact, actually, that is something that really gets overlooked. The fact that he wasn't just a striker that scored 2 goals in the FA Cup final. He also actually scored key goals in 2 cup finals in 4 years. So we had 2 trophies in 4 years.
Yeah.
Partly thanks to Peter McParland.
Yeah, absolutely. And a promotion, although relegation was pretty disastrous. To come straight back up. And I think he was, the kind of fulcrum of that side. Probably, like Jerry Hitchens would play a big part as well before he went to Inter Milan. But yeah, I think it's interesting to look at that kind of wider influence that he had. The 1961 League Cup final is a fascinating one, because the final was actually at the start of the 61-62 season. I don't know if you knew.
Oh, that. Right, okay, yeah.
Well, because I think it just took so long. So, they played a lot of replays. So Jerry Hitchens had scored, along with McParland, quite a few goals in the essentially what was the 60-61 League Cup campaign. Hitchens then was sold, so it was gone by the time. Right? Yeah, gone by the time that Villa played the final against Rotherham, which they won 3-2 on aggregate, and McParland scored the 3rd goal. So, so I think that, when you look at that influence, the number of 120 odd goals, is a really big, contribution across that time. So I think it's, important to note that legacy, isn't it? And I think there's obviously been a huge kind of outpouring over the past couple of days from the club and fans and lots of kind of media outlets, about his influence, because I think his influence then goes beyond Villa as well.
Who would be the last player to have scored that many goals for Villa, like 120?
How many did Andy Gray score?
Yeah, well, that's a question for our audience. If anyone can let us know, because we're now we're now thinking on the spot. We've put ourselves right on the spot. Thanks.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thanks for that.
The
I
other
wouldn't
thing,
have thought it was. Yeah, no one much later than Gray, I would guess.
going back to the FA Cup and just looking back at that footage, what really struck out for me is the fact that obviously I don't know why I'm mentioning this. We recently had a cup semi-final at Wembley, which I'm not going to talk any more about that. But the semi-final in the season we last won the FA Cup, it went to a replay against Burnley, who in a previous episode we've talked about the FA Cup and playing Burnley in semi-finals. But the first semi-final was at Molineux. And then the second semi-final, well, thank you very much to our friends in Small Heath, because we won the replay at St Andrews. And then went to the FA Cup. So, there you go. Bring back semi-finals in more localised areas. That would be much nicer, I think. If we could play a semi-final at St Andrews and get to an FA Cup final again, I'd be quite happy with that. But yeah, no, he's, the man we're talking about here, he is a bit of a cup hero for Villa, really, isn't he? And I think the other thing is you can easily forget about the heroes of the past, especially if they're not in those fashionable decades. I always find football fans of the modern era, they might hark back to kind of the 70s and 80s and, well, nowadays the 90s as well, as kind of like historic times. But let's not forget those heroes from a bit further back in the 50s, for example. Especially when we're a club that last won that major trophy in 1957.
Thing is, it's the passage of time, isn't it? And McParland was the last surviving member of the side that lifted the FA Cup. So that in itself shows that, if he's the last was the last surviving playing member, then people in the stand, there aren't going to be a lot. There aren't a lot of people that are around to pass on those stories. So I think that's the club has should and does relatively have a good role in helping us remember that. And I'm sure there'll be a fitting tribute to McParland at the final home game of the season against Spurs.
Well, let's hope there is a really fitting tribute, as you say. I'm sure there will be. The other thing, of course, to mention is I know that the first team would have been desperate to have avenged all the issues we've had with the FA Cup since 1957 and the semi-final that we had that I won't talk about. Sadly, didn't turn out the way we wanted it to. But we did have some FA Cup success at Villa Park in the FA Youth Cup, and it feels to me like this feels so poignant when we've had the passing of such a legend that the youth players, I like to think they used it as a bit of motivation, and that's why we've ended up winning the FA Youth Cup for the 5th time.
Yeah, I think the 25,000 people in Villa Park probably helped as well, which was phenomenal, really. I've
got to say.
We were there. It was great. It was really good, really great afternoon. And in fact, there was a minute silence in advance of the game, which was a period of silence, but turned into more of a kind of halt is in the sky, which was nice, and the players wore black armbands. So I think that is a precursor to what will happen. Of course, it wasn't just a minute's silence for Peter McParland, because another former Villa player also passed away over the weekend, Jake Finley, who was a goalkeeper for Villa in the 1970s. So it was nice to see them both remembered for that, and a kind of neat link between Finley and the result today, because Finley was in the side when Villa first ever won the Youth Cup, the FA Youth Cup in 1972. So it seemed like there was quite a bit of an emotion around that, and I think to remember Finley in that way is a really important one. He didn't unfortunately for his career have the impact at Villa that someone like Peter McParland did, but again was a really reliable, often backup keeper, kind of competed with some really strong Villa keepers like Jim Coombs, later John Burridge, Jimmy Rimmer. Yeah. So but played in the first ever European game at Villa Park in 1975. So
against Antwerp. Is that right? Royal Antwerp.
Royal Antwerp, yeah. So again, I think I often talk about this, but I think all these players and their differing contributions are all part of that wider Villa story, and I think that's a really important one.
Oh yeah, it's a rich tapestry, isn't it? A football club, especially a football club like Aston Villa. And I think if you're going to play or support a club like this, if you've got any connection to it, all of these things have real meaning. And I just feel that any of those young players that were on the pitch today, who've now had that experience of winning a trophy wearing claret and blue, having to wear a black armband to remember heroes of the past, you just hope that just drives them on into the future. And who knows, we might have a future senior team cup winner or two or three in that squad today who are now going to go and take us forwards. And it's happened in the past, youth cup success. Normally, success in youth teams can breed a bit of success in senior teams. It's whether you keep those players together or whether they get sold to another club and they do it there. But there's real opportunity. I just feel like there's so much optimism when you've got a youth team performing, and what a fantastic achievement from them. And thank you to them for being able to pay a great tribute.
Yeah, absolutely.
Peter McParland.
Absolutely. And the scorer of the second goal, Cole Brannigan, is Northern Irish. So I'm sure that Peter McParland would have approved of both his goal and his heritage. Because I think just to kind of mention a couple of more things about Peter McParland, obviously was Northern Irish and had a huge impact as a Northern Irish player. And I think actually that's, if we're talking about legacy and legacy for Villa beyond the FA Cup, actually his exploits with Northern Ireland probably put him into the wider stratosphere. And I noticed that Brian Glanville has written a great obituary in The Guardian today, which is, kind of covers a lot of that, his history as a Northern Irish player. So he was the first Aston Villa player to play in a World Cup final.
It was 1958.
The World Cup finals, so 1958. Yeah. And fairly phenomenally. I mean, Northern Ireland got to the quarterfinals, which was probably fairly unprecedented. But McParland scored 5 goals in that campaign, and I think that was whilst it was quite a romantic story that Northern Ireland had reached the World Cup finals. The fact that they did so well and spearheaded by McParland's goals, I think was a really great story. So I think that very storied Northern Irish team of, again, some of the players I mentioned earlier, like Harry Gregg, Jackie Blanchflower, McParland, Billy Bingham, and again, until this weekend, he was the last surviving member of that team as well. So again, it just shows, I think, the passage of time that we are kind of experiencing, really.
Yeah, I mean, 5 goals in a World Cup finals is not to be sniffed at, is it? That's pretty impressive. I know that was the one where Just Fontaine of France scored 13, which is the record.
I mean, McParland was only outscored by players for teams that went further in the tournament. So Pele being one of them, Just Fontaine.
Pele got 6. So yeah, I think he did pretty well. He could be proud of that.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So a poignant weekend for Villa fans and football fans alike. I think with both the departures of McParland, and of course Jake Finlay as well.
Yeah. Well, we hope you've enjoyed listening to this and giving us a chance to pay tribute. And we'll be back with another episode very soon. We've also got another episode out, actually, on the 97-98 season. So if you get a chance to watch or listen to that episode, that's out tonight. So you've got 2 episodes from us this week.
There we go. Brilliant. Thanks for listening, guys. Up
Thanks,
the Villa.
guys. Up the Villa.